as a reminder, yesterday we talked about organic compounds of life. What do they have to have? At least 2 carbons, and they're going to react with, try to say it without looking. They're big molecules. They're big molecules made up of
carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and
CHON PS or CHONPS. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Good. So the first one we're going to, the first macro or large molecule that's considered an organic compound because it's composed of at least two carbons is carbohydrates. Look how I wrote that name. You see, carbohydrates. So what do you think carbohydrates are made up of? Carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. I'm going to keep them in order of CHON PS, so we're going to say CHO. But the word tells you the composition. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And just something you want to know that you're not going to have to know on the test, but you can never say I didn't tell you, is that these carbon, hydrogens, and oxygens are always, and instead of 1 to 2 to 1, because that's the ratio, I'm going to make it easier. Well, I have to say 1 to 2 to 1. That means for every 2 carbons, there's going to be how many hydrogens? 1 to 2 to 1. For every 2 carbons, 4 hydrogens, and 1 to 2 to 1. So carbons are 2, hydrogens are doubled, 4, oxygens would be 2. So if I have 6 carbons, how many hydrogens? 12, and how many oxygens? 6. If I have 4 carbons, how many hydrogens? 8. How many oxygens?
4.
Good. 1 to 2 to 1. All right? So every molecule is arranged that way if it's a carbohydrate. And the reason I say that is because there's going to be a very close similarity between carbs and lipids in their composition, and that makes up the biggest difference. Carbohydrates building blocks are sugars. We call them simple sugars. So let's go ahead and write that. Instead of just sugar, write simple sugars. On the test, you have to know building blocks of each organic compound. The building blocks of carbohydrates are simple sugars. Anybody know the function of a carb? Why do we eat carbs for? Energy. They are the fastest form of energy. They're quick energy for your body. You need a quick boost, you eat carbs. And then hopefully you burn them off, right? Because they're the hardest to burn, yeah. Well, not the hardest, but second. There's 2 types, sugars and cellulose, and I'm just going to go like this for you because we only want to focus on sugars for now, okay? And I'm going to go like this too. Look, those are the things that are not necessarily needed to learn fully for the test. They just help you understand things. There's types of sugars. So our carbs all have sugars because every block of a carb is a simple sugar. If there's 1 block or 1 simple sugar, anybody know what it's called? And I left out these. So what does 1 mean? What's a root word for 1? Mono. That's exactly what they're called. Monosaccharides. 1 block of this complex molecule here that's composed of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens. If you're 2 sugars, what are you? Bi. There's another 2. It's not bi.
Bio?
Nope. It's di.
Oh.
So di also means 2. Disaccharides. If you're more than 2, they call you many sugars. What are you? Poly. Good job. So tri would be 3. But poly is 3 or more. Polysaccharides in your body, because think of this. When you eat simple sugars, your body processes them faster. When you eat complex sugars, which are called polysaccharides, or complex or heavy carbs, your body struggles to break them down because they're made up of a lot of sugars. All right, don't think of lipids. I don't want you to think of what you know of lipids. Think of what you know of lipids according to my last two slides. What is a lipid? Let's go back 2 slides. What are we covering right now? It's an organic compound. What else do we know about lipids if we go back 2 slides? It's full of carbon and it has to have at least 2. What else do we know about lipids if we go back 2 slides? It's a big molecule because all organic compounds are big molecules. And if you didn't know, I'm going to cover 3 of them. Carbohydrates was the first one. Lipids is the second. We're going to cover a third. And then later when we do unit 5 or 6, we're going to cover the 4th one. Okay? So lipids are made up also of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So they're also made up of CHO. So if I was to ask you what's the difference between a lipid and a carb, just from one slide to the next, what is it?
They're much bigger.
In this picture they are. I didn't show you a big one. They're made up of the same elements, but the way they combine is different. Now, another difference is their building blocks. If you look at this molecule, this is a molecule of a lipid. And every lipid is made up of this exact similar structure or combinations of them. So what do you think are the building blocks of lipids by looking at that picture? Yes.
Carbon?
Not carbon. We know it's made up of carbon.
Oxygen?
Look at the picture, and the building block has this and these 3 things. So what are the building blocks? We know it's made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Combined, they form fatty acids. And what's the backbone? Glycerol. So the building blocks of carbs are what? Building blocks of carbs.
3 fatty acids.
Carbs.
Oh, carbs.
What are the building blocks of carbs?
Carbon.
Sugar. What are the building blocks of lipids? Glycerol and fatty acids. What are the elements in carb? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. What are the elements in lipids? Same thing, okay? What are some examples and functions of lipids? What do you know about lipids? What do they do? No, protein is our last organic compound. What do lipids do? What do they do to your body? They make you fat. They are fats. Fats tend to stay in places where you don't want them. Why are they there? They're like a storage for what? Energy. Good. That is their main function in our bodies. They stay stored in your body in the places that you don't want them, mainly here for men, here for women, right? And they stay there, so when you need long-term sources of energy, they release a little bit. Also, for organisms that are in the cold, it provides them with like an insulation. So think of polar bears that are full of fat and blubber. That's how they're able to survive that type of environment, because it keeps them warm. Another thing I want you to know about lipids is that they form what's called a phospholipid layer of the cells. Good. So that's our next unit, by the way. So lipids form membranes of cells, and they are what controls what enters and exits the cells. So very important that you know, and I'm going to highlight lipids right here. That's a terrible highlight. Let me make it lighter. Actually, I'll just underline it. Lipids form membranes, okay? Last type of lipid is what we call waxes. And what do you think is happening in this picture? If you're a lipid, if you're a fat, what happens when you add water?
They float. It separates.
It's kind of like pushes it out. It actually repels water. And the same thing is going to happen in your membrane, okay? Lipids have an opportunity to allow certain water in and keep certain water out because of that repelling feature.